Hi there.
Hello,
I'm
everybody.
Martha Teichner, and this is Nhlanhla Mahlangu, and he is the co-director and choreographer and a lot of the creative force behind Dark Noon. I would like to know how many of you have already seen it. So a fair number, but not everybody.
Okay.
Start out, if you would please. Tell me why the show is about the American West as opposed to white colonial representation from 1652 in South Africa from the Dutch, and then in the 19th century the English and the Voortrekkers who went out, who are the equivalent of the pioneers in South Africa, and the tribal violence there.
First of all, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Dark Noon initially was not meant to be a piece about the Western, but it came out of rehearsal, out of the process, out of the thinking to say maybe this is the angle it should take, because it is not a piece that was pre-written and then we went into rehearsal to rehearse a thing that is preconceived, but it was a conversation. And I can answer this question by maybe telling you what it was meant to be. It was Tu Bieng, my collaborator. He wanted to talk about his own ignorance. He wanted to question his own ignorance as a European on his gaze on Africa. He wanted to talk about the general European gaze on Africa.
And he's Danish, right?
And he's Danish. And in these, and I was just saying today during lunch that it could have been a bad Lion King. But through conversation with actors, directors, and through the process, we chose the West End as our frame. And the West End, because America is very powerful in terms of media and film, and we grow up, we are very much influenced by what America puts out through movies, through music and fashion. And everybody, when they were talking about their childhood, there's no way you will finish a sentence without mentioning a cowboy. So it was a very easy entry.
When there was no television in South Africa until 1976, the apartheid government made sure of that until SABC came along in 1976. How did people get to know the Western? Was it just by going to movie theaters? Was it video? I mean, how did it pervade the thought of people growing up and living in South Africa?
Well, we are lucky because all our cast, they were born nothing earlier than 1979. So we were exposed to TV, even though it was not every house would have a TV, but I remember the times when we'd have 9 children sitting under the table watching a black and white TV because in the whole street there was one house with the TV. But your question is, how did people consume the knowledge and information about the Westerns and cowboys? It would be those who were privileged enough to get education and or otherwise, South Africa, I say it was a prison for more than 300 years because during apartheid time, there was a clear segregation of what people get access to and what people don't get access to. And to be personalized this thing, all I knew were the protest songs that were sung in the streets and the church songs.
Did white people have the same exposure to the Western that black South Africans did?
I mean, every white family had a TV. When my grandmother was a domestic worker, And she worked for different white families, and I never went to nursery school. I would go with my grandmother everywhere she worked. And there was always a TV there, but she never switched it on because it was not hers to do that. All she had to do was to keep it clean. I don't know what access of, because today when we talk to people sometimes, you know, in their middle age, they would tell me, some friends of mine, that during apartheid, I didn't know there was apartheid in South Africa because white people were very much protected from what was happening around the country. And Angus Gibson, my friend, who's a filmmaker, he says, only when I was 19, I started realizing there was something wrong, and I was curious, and I would go to Soweto, and I wanted to see the differences, and then I was interested in what is this difference, and then how he became a filmmaker.
When you think of the influence of American Westerns, was there nothing produced in South Africa that showed South African history? Were there no similar movies and stories and plays and so on that in a sense, mythologized the South African colonial history the way we see a kind of mythologized West?
It depends at what time, because during apartheid, you would get arrested, you'd go to jail if you had material that was exposing what was happening in the country. It was illegal to have certain material, whether it's video or it's publications. There were books that were forbidden. And, but we all know about Sarafina, which came, you know, it became a Broadway musical, and the Market Theatre was one of the few theaters in South Africa who allowed what they call township theater and protest theater to be performed.
It was like a little, I spent 3 years in South Africa in the 87, 88, 89, and the Market Theatre was like an island where blacks and whites could sit in the same audience. And it was almost like a grenade being thrown into the theater when the actress Janet Suzman put on an Othello that actually had a black Othello kissing a white Desdemona. And I was there at the time, and but the Market Theatre was the only place in the country where that could happen.
It's Immorality Act. The most perverse thing about apartheid is that it was law. It was a legislated law that no black person should hold hands or kiss or engage in a relationship with a white person. And Trevor Noah tells a beautiful story in his book, Born a Crime, that his Swedish father and his Xhosa mother, he had to dress like a domestic worker and hold Trevor and walk with Trevor's father and look like she is the worker in Trevor's father's house. So that's in order for them to walk together on the same side of the road, because, you know, it was clear, on the other side of the road, that's where black people can walk, and on the other side of the road, that's where white people. So there are, and beaches, an ocean or a beach, it's a natural thing that should belong to anyone. But in South Africa, it was clear there were places, the most beautiful part of the beach, it would be written for whites only. You literally be arrested for, if you're black, you're there. And it sounds like something from the 1800s when I'm talking about it. But to think about, South Africa got its democracy only in 1994. This is quite new. This information is still new in our bodies, in our minds.
Tell your story. Tell about how you grew up and how you processed the cowboy image, the image of the West, as it came to you in movies.
those who watch the performance, at the end of the last part of the show, we have an epilogue where actors talk about their childhood and how their cowboy story have influenced them. I was born in Togoza. I grew up in a squatter camp. A squatter camp is, how do I explain this? When people who have no houses would invade an open land and start building their makeshift houses using corrugated iron, wood, plastic boxes. And we lived in the squatter camp for 19 years. And
how many of you in your family?
it was my grandmother, my mother, myself, my sister, and my little brother. And of course, you've built this thing in a land that's supposedly not yours. It would be destroyed by the police, and you would rebuild it. You would destroy it, you would rebuild it. You just keep fighting until they leave you alone, until they give up, actually, and eventually they would build the project houses. Now it's no longer a squatter camp, but there are still squatter camps that exist. And also living in that squatter camp, just because my teenage years are at the time of the release of Nelson Mandela. And the release of Nelson Mandela looks like a monumental time of South Africa where apartheid is gone, black people are going to be free. But there's a lot of things that were not documented that people don't know about. That during that time when Mandela was released and the time of the negotiation to democracy, there's a huge war that happened in South Africa where 90,000 people died. And in Boipatong,
I was there. And
in Paula Park, in Khumalo Street, and where black people were turned against each other, and other group was armed by the military to shoot the other, and the other group was armed by the ANC military wings, and people were just slaughtering each other. I saw many guns when I was young. And this is not a Western movie. For me, it's different. It was live. People were slaughtering each other in front of me, and I was between 12 years and 14 years. But when you live in that kind of environment, you normalize it, and you make peace with the fact that that's going to be your life. That is it. And also, you are 12, and everybody, our shack got burned 3 times. It gets normalized. And later in life, at some point when there's a better day where you can sit and watch TV, there's this violence as well, but it's glorified because there's a boss and there's a staring, and then he shoots them. You don't even understand English. You can only get excited when there's action. So you grow up in violence, you are watching violence, and nothing helps you. And my relationship with the Westerns, it's in a sense that I've always, it was fantasy. I wished we had a TV so that I can also watch cowboys, not knowing that I was actually looking at them live.
Did the gun aspect of the cowboy movies affect actual life because of internalizing that mythology of the Western movie?
The gun aspect of it...
It's certainly in Dark Noon.
Yes. Over and above the guns that we see on TV, there are guns in the streets. there's always been guns in the streets, and a gun has always been an instrument of power. When the police has a gun, criminals carry guns. You wish you had a gun because there's abuse or domestic violence that you can't do anything about. So a gun is an instrument of power that everyone who is powerless, psychologically, you wish you had a gun to solve certain problems.
What did kids who grew up surreptitiously or otherwise watching Western movies, black kids in South Africa, what did they want to grow up to be, given that that imagery was floating around in their heads?
Like I say, I mean, the gun is an instrument of power, and most kids wanted to be police. But
they were afraid of police as
they were
well.
afraid of police, but you know that there is an element of power that comes with being a police. It's almost, and also the black police in 1976 were shooting black children in the streets. And which is a whole thing about the self-hate. And I can't tell you of a single boy child in South Africa who never fantasized about the gun. I remember in rehearsal of Dark Noon, there were a lot of props we had on the floor. Kettles, hats, costumes, sirens, alarms, bells, microphones. And there was a day when guns arrived. Every male actor, because we were exploring our childhood, and like choose a prop, everybody ran for the best gun possible. And we just played this thing of shooting and shooting and shooting, because if you ask any boy child, let's think of a childhood game that you used to play. It's gun. It's like just bang, bang, cops and robbers and shooting and shooting.
Did it seem real or did it seem unreal because of the movie kind of iconography?
When you're watching a movie, you're watching who is the hero, and then you want to associate yourself with the hero in the movie. So if you're watching Spider-Man, you would ask your parents to buy you a Spider-Man costume because you want to be the hero of that movie. If you're watching Bud Spencer, you want to be Bud Spencer. If you're watching Clint Eastwood, you want to be Clint Eastwood. So, because film is so powerful when you're watching it, and also when you live in poverty, and your fantasy out of poverty is to be a hero, and the heroes that are presented to you are people with guns.
It's really interesting to hear you say that. When I was working there, in a sense, we kept a major bureau presence in South Africa, with people in New York thinking that in some ways that what we were doing in South Africa was really just because of the civil rights issues in the United States. And the producer I worked with in South Africa and I kept saying, no, this is a different country. This is a different set of issues. You can't, it is not, we're not just in South Africa because it's a mirror image of civil rights in the United States. And yet it seems that there are some parallels in the sense that young black males in South Africa grew up possibly expecting to die before the age of 25.
Oh, sure.
And just as in this country, you see that with a culture among poor black Americans. And I think the iconography that poor black Americans gravitate toward now that maybe have the same kind of issues would be hip-hop culture rather than Westerns. And is there any sense of the American Western being supplanted by hip-hop culture in South Africa?
Hip-hop culture is very, very interesting because in as much as in all the rap artists or hip-hop artists, you would get a revolutionary message and a lyrical content that questions the status quo, and lyrical content that celebrates being black. But at the same time, so let me just go back a little bit. Apartheid is very perverse. It's perverse in this way that when apartheid is the most successful project, that it doesn't need Dr. Verwoerd, who designed it, to be there in order for it to continue, in order for the apartheid machine to keep working. Apartheid, in the mines, people would be turned into alcoholics, and after, due to the dope system, or in the farms as well, and they would build a beer hall just outside, in the middle of the hostel, so that when you socialize, you keep yourself drunk, so that you don't get to think about what's happening here. And then, in every train station in South Africa, there's a beer hall where they sell very toxic alcohol. And that is a strategy to make sure that when you get out of the shaft in the mine, you mess yourself up with alcohol, so you sleep drunk, so that you don't think, you don't strategize, you don't revolutionize the whole thing. And then during your day off, before you get home, you need to be drunk so that you can beat your wife. And then you beat your wife because you've finished the money in the mine, you drank it all, and you finished, and then you come home, you see little things that look like you, and they remind you of how much you hate yourself, and then you hit them. So,
and the fact that you haven't given your money to your wife.
The fact that you haven't given your money to your wife. So you are in that situation, and then your children start singing about you, the abusive father, but forgetting that it's the root of it is much deeper. I'm talking about hip-hop music. So if hip-hop music is talking about guns, it's talking about, yes, and it's spread all over the world, but it's not only the artist who woke up one day and decided, I want to talk about guns, I want to talk about rape, I want to talk about, but the root cause is like, it is the child responding to a traumatized father, responding to an abused mother, so it is a ripple effect. And when hip-hop gains its popularity in a form, if we say, okay, we don't want to watch Westerns, they are violent. Okay, fine, we're not watching them, but we still have hip-hop. And hip-hop is not being performed by white people, it's being performed by black people, but it's still carrying the trauma of slavery and apartheid, what it did to human beings. So what I'm saying, the apartheid, slavery, and colonialism, it's so perverse in such a way that it is not an event that came and went, which is the way that white South Africa wants us to see apartheid, as something that was in the past. We had democracy in '94, now we're in the present, we're looking forward into the future.
Another aspect of that, when I was there, and again, I was there 87, 88, 89, and then came back several times before 1994 and in 1994. South Africa at that time, it was when it was clear that apartheid, or at least the system that had been solid before, was beginning to crumble in some ways, at least the political aspects of it. And South Africa at that time had the highest rate and the highest number of family killings, where a father would kill his whole family and then kill himself. And that's what it tended to be. And it was almost universally Afrikaners who saw their privilege slipping away. And it became a huge problem for the Christian or for the Dutch Reformed Church and so on. And there was a white playwright named Paul Slabolepsy, who you probably are familiar with, who wrote about that aspect of the crumbling of Afrikaner society, because all the things that had propped it up, the privilege, the guarantees of a good life at the expense of someone else, were falling apart. And some of his plays, the reason I asked about whether it affected the white population, his plays showed white people, brothers, acting out like a cowboy shootout and killing each other. And so the perversity of apartheid had an insidious effect on white South Africa that wasn't equal, but certainly was parallel to what was going on in black society.
This is what I say about apartheid in South Africa, that it was not an event that came and went and now it's gone. It was the successful project, most successful project, that left all of us in South Africa sick. And it left all white South Africans with a disease of superiority complex and fear. And it left all black people with a disease of inferiority complex and a level of self-hate and a level of knowing very well that I deserve less because I'm black.
How does Dark Noon affect the cast members in terms of performing it? Does it provide any kind of a cultural catharsis in some way? And because obviously the performances are very self-styled. As you said, they're not kind of clearly written out in the...
What it does for performers is different from performer to performer. And secondly, I am not a therapist or a psychologist. And I know that our intention is to make art, not to change the world. But, and I would be too naive that to believe that art can change the world, and we need more than that. But the luxury of Dark Noon is that the aesthetics, the performative of it came from the performers. The way we directed it, Chu Bieng and I, it was not an approach where I am your director and you listen to what I've got to say, but it was more of a process of listening to the actors and listening to their stories and listening to their needs and listening to where they are at the moment. And it helps me, definitely. Being involved in Dark Noon, I can only speak for myself, and I know it's different from actor to actor. But I can tell you now, Dark Noon, it is not a story of the Western. It is not the story of America. It is the story of the actors. But it is told through the lens of, or not through the lens, but through the frame of a Western.
There are a lot of video cameras all around. Why is that? Is that because we're supposed to see this as a kind of a turned upside down Western movie?
First, it's an aesthetic, it's a creative choice, but we are inspired by the Western movies. And over and above looking at a finished product of a Western movie, we're looking at the making of a Western movie. And we are on stage with the audience, and we are in the process of making. So, you know, a rehearsal process is the process of making, and we never stop making, even when the show has been performed so many times, and even when the show is actually live on stage with the audience, the making continues. Because why are we making while we perform is actually, it is us thinking in material. It is us thinking in action, even during the performance. Because the most unfortunate thing is that, about performance, the most unfortunate thing about performance, any performance, it is what the audience get to see. It's a residue of what the process was. And we are holding on to the process because that's where the work is.
Why is the audience brought in to participate?
The audience is brought in to participate, firstly, because we think it's beautiful to see a real thing happening in real time, unlike seeing everything that is pre-planned and pre-polished and pre-choreographed for you. And it gives us new energy. And secondly, the audience is invited on stage we want to confront ourselves, and we want the audience to confront themselves as well. And we want humans to confront their own privilege.
I was really struck when I saw in the scene where essentially 3 audience members are auctioned off as if they were slaves.
Mm-hmm. Slavery, we all know about it as history. We all read about it in books that we buy with our money. We all watch movies that we pay for, and it looks like an event that came and went. And we are aware of modern day slavery that continues through capitalism and the systems that are in place today, that people are modern day slaves and they don't know it, and until they know it. And what Dark Noon as a play, we're playing a game, actually. It is called a play for a reason. When people leave their houses, they're coming to watch a play. So you are in a mood of a play, so let's play. So we are playing with our audience.
But the people who were being auctioned off, all 3 of whom were white, you could see the expressions on their faces. It was very awkward because this country has the history, the very dark history of slavery and its consequences and the selling of black people. And so it flips this
I don't know why.
scene.
I don't know why this question makes me. It gives me. I don't know the feeling it gives me. I can't describe. That during a play, a performance of Dark Noon, white faces, white audience members were auctioned in a play, and it was a pretend auction, and it felt so uncomfortable to the participants and the audience. And does that mean it is more comfortable when it happens for real on a black body who is not actually in a play, in real life, a king, a father who is being sold and auctioned? Is this what I'm hearing, that it is awkward to see a white person playing slave being sold? It is more awkward to see that, and it's more like rather than the normal image of watching Amistad. And also Amistad is a play, it's a movie, but reading a book or knowing exactly or the actual history of a person being sold.
Is the reaction to that scene different when this show is done in Europe than what occurred here last night?
No, it's not different.
Is it just as uncomfortable for the participants?
It is just as uncomfortable. And I don't know, I mean, this whole thing about, oh my God, we're going to perform Dark Noon in America, and especially in Charleston, because Charleston, the transatlantic slave trading and the ocean, oh my God, the feeling. It doesn't matter where. The thing is also, it's not, and in Dark Noon, it's not the story of America, it's the story of Europeans who were starving and hungry in Europe and who came to look for food and a better life in America. It's a story of Europe, you know. And so to answer your question is, for us, first time we performed Dark Noon, we performed it for 150 people because the venue was small.
Where was that?
It was in Denmark, in Copenhagen, in 2019. And therefore, Dark Noon was never created as a crowd pleaser. And it was never created for a bigger crowd. It was a work created as a conversation of the artists themselves and the creators and the audience. And we were happy to perform it with a small number of audience. And we are happy to perform it to a bigger number of audience. We are happy to perform it in France. We are happy to perform it in America. We are happy to perform it in South Africa or Copenhagen. For us, Dark Noon is Dark Noon is Dark Noon. It doesn't matter where we are in the world. We will stay to the story and we will stick to the cause. We will not compromise the artistic integrity due to geography.
You said to me the other day that you've never performed it in South Africa.
Yes.
Why is that?
South Africa can't afford it at the moment.
How do you think South Africa would respond compared to, say, Europe or the United States?
I'm South African. I know my people in South Africa. There is a big joke that I make that South Africa was the last to get democracy, while other parts of the countries got their independence in the 70s, in the 60s. And why South Africa was so late, I usually say because they thought we were enjoying it. We were enjoying apartheid. Why would they think we were enjoying it? Because we were singing all the time. And they say South Africa is the country that won its struggle for liberation in 4-part harmony. And there's something about singing, and I put inverted commas in the singing. In African society, in most African society, art, dance, singing, it's not about aesthetic. It's not about decoration, but it's about a function of life. Let me give an example. And I'm answering, and I know I give you very long answers.
It's okay with us.
I'll go back to the mine. I'll go back to the mine and I'll go back in the 1800s. And I want to talk about song and singing in the South African context. In the mine, when there is a rail, which is heavy and long, and it needs to be lifted and shifted, you need 150 people to grab it at the same time, to lift it at the same time, and to shift it at the same time. And how do you coordinate 150 people to grab at the same time, lift and shift? There need to be a rhythm that they follow. Haya ngabona ziya qubula Sasha, haya ngabona ziya qubula Sasha, ibambe gudlum qubula Sasha, pusha qubula Sasha, pusha qubula. So this 150 people, they are engaging in this chant, and the work happens. So
just like chain gangs and enslaved people work songs in this country.
Sure, because these are black people you're talking about.
Yes.
They are carrying these functions of life in their DNA from centuries, because it's not about let's make a song so that nobody sits down and say, let's compose a song. You know, something funny, when I was in Canada, the students wanted to protest, or they were not happy about something. And they said, because you're coming from South Africa, please teach us a song that you're going to sing during protest. And I said, I can't do that. But no, you have so many songs. Teach us one of yours. Now, you have 18 people who have been killed by the police. And it's their funeral. It happens, it's a mass funeral. And when the mass funeral is happening of the 18 people, the PATCO, the bus company, won't provide buses because it's in the state of emergency. We will ban the buses because they are white-owned. So what are we going to do with the 18 bodies that needs to be buried? So we're going to carry them, and we're going to walk a long distance to the cemetery to bury them. And funerals are a big thing, and maybe these are the funerals of the comrades, of the freedom fighters. So it's thousands and thousands of people. People would carry the coffin, and they would start walking. Am I allowed to do this? Maybe not.
The question is whether it's possible.
And people will carry these coffins, and then they would start marching. Maybe you are singing a song, a church song, and then you run out of songs because all the songs you've sang, and then you keep singing another one, and then you reach the point where you've stopped singing and just walking. And you realize that you are in the middle of this place. Where you come from is far. Where you're still going is far. And then you start realizing that you have unconsciously synchronized your walk or your run. And then you realize that it's actually, we are all stepping on one right leg as we go. And you realize, you start noticing your breath. Can everybody just join me? Hi, hi, what's, hi, hi. Come, I want to hear you. Hi,
Hi.
what's awena? Hi, Kerala kichima, hi, kichima, hi, Kerala kichima, hi, kichima, hi. Come, Kerala man, hi, kichima. This is just somebody here. Hi, kichima. He's just encouraging you not to stop. Kichima wena, hi, kichima, hi. Hey, ta, 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 ta. Kerala kichima, hi, kichima, hi, hi. Kerala kichima, hi, kichima, hi, hi. Kerala kichima, hi, kichima, hi, hi. Kerala kichima, hi, kichima, hi.
You have no idea how powerful it is to be in the middle of thousands of people doing toi toi and moving as he's physically describing. It's just, if you're,
First of all, your friend is dead. Is in the coffin that you are carrying. Your feet are burning. It's far where you came from. It's far where you're going. And you can be shot at any time for being there because it's an illegal gathering. It is illegal to gather in certain numbers. And it's thousands of you. And you've lost a friend, you've lost a husband, you've lost a lover, and you are going to bury them. Hi, hi, you are crying. So it's not a song. It is the function. It is the function of moving forward. And these functions are not new, are not only the apartheid functions. When our house burned down, if I was a piano player, I would play the notes of how my grandmother cried. Because I remember very well how she cried. I can hear her note for note. That is because I'm a composer, I'm always interested in sound. So I remember that. And if I repeat how she cried, it is a document. So these songs are documents that marks times and that marks events. When the warriors come from the war in the 1800 and they left by 100 and they come back by 18, the women would cry and children would start crying as they come and gather in the kraal and sit down. And they're not holding their shields, facing forward, they're holding them inside out. It shows that we've lost the war. And they would cry. When women and children cry, they would cry the whole day, and tomorrow they would remember how they cried. Wo siyakhuleka ngonyama, hawo, hawo, wo siyakhuleka ngoba mkhonto, hawo, 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 wo siyakhuleka ngonyama, wo siyakhuleka ngoba mkhonto. When the king dies today, that's the song you sing. You are, because the king never dies, and the king never gets buried, you plant the king so that the king continue to live in the next king. And what I've just done, it's a song, right? But for the people who are doing it, it's not a song. We've lost a king today. We are remembering the first king who died and how her mother cried. She cried this way. You can score it, you can put it in notation, but it's not a song.
In Dark Noon, there is narration, and then there isn't dialogue like in a typical play. There's narration and movement. And from what you were just doing and saying, why is that an integral, or why is it constructed that way? And how did you choreograph it?
The narration is for us to get a sense of our frame, to help the audience to say, we are telling this story through the frame of the West End, and then there are two progressions. I always say this, there are two movements in the play. There is a horizontal progression where it starts middle to the end. And there's a vertical progression. And the vertical progression, it's the emotional depth, it's the unsaid but performed. There is narration and there's performative. The narration is just to give us a sense of where we are, so that, because the stories we are telling the stories as many as the number of the performers on stage.
Now, how did you choreograph it?
How did I choreograph that? As a choreographer, I work with somatic memory. I've got exercises that I give to my performers so let's say we have about 9 chapters in Dark Noon, and I can't remember them in sequence. Let's say chapter 1, Little House on the Prairie, how cowboys discovered the land. In South Africa, we have a big issue when it comes to land. The idea, what does the land mean to you as an actor, as a human being? And then we'd gather information, or what it means, would write things down, and then people would read what the land means. And have you ever experienced the loss of land and landlessness? I've explained mine, and performers would tell the stories of how they got kicked out of the farm that they owned because of the Land Act of 1913. So we take these stories and then we start exploring them on the floor. So like, and it just depends, Uguti, how do you want to start? Like, what does land mean to you? Like, here's the land, what would you do?
But there are certain things in it that, I mean, it all works together and so on, but I also saw techniques that almost looked like clown techniques.
Sure. Those are the offers of the actors.
There was one person who kept doing this with his hand as he walked around.
Yeah. That's Siyambonga Mdubeki. It's a character he chose. Could it be a man who had an injured hand who kicked them out of their farm in the Eastern Cape? Thulani Zwane, he just hugs the land and he cries. Bongani Masango, who decided to make a choice of, if you had land as much as you need, what would you do with it? And it's all these. The thing is, when you're creating choreography, you are looking for movement content. That's all. But this movement, it needs to be informed by meaning. So I excavate meaning, and the meaning that sits deep in your body, and where you feel it in your body, we activate that part of the body, and we move it through the space, and we find movement material, and then we take that movement material, we spread it around, and then we use it in certain parts of the play.
How do you convince people? I mean, I remember reading reviews of the performance in Edinburgh, and on every single one of the reviews left out the part that it was the story, that it really related to this South African experience, and only talked about how essentially it was looking at the real American West, turning the mythology of the American West upside down, and it came out really as somebody sort of, as a number of reviewers, and again, this is the Edinburgh Festival, criticizing the United States as opposed to everybody holding up a mirror to their own experience and their own colonial past and this and that and the other thing.
And the question is, how did we convince?
It's clear that the show is about more than that. Mm-hmm. What's the message here in terms of trying to make people understand that it isn't just an attack on the American Western mythology and an attempt to force Americans to look at themselves in the mirror and their own history in the mirror?
It is not our job to convince people. I don't know how to convince them, and I certainly don't feel like I should.
Do you think that Americans seeing the show should be looking at it not from the South African point of view, but again, looking at our own history and embracing the reality as opposed to the
And
mythology?
I don't know. I mean, the South African story, it helps us not to be caricatures in performance. Because all the performers who are in Dark Noon, they were not born in the 1800s. And they don't know that history may influence them, but they were not there. But they were only there where they were in their life. And for every, my thing as a choreographer and director is that even if I give you Romeo and Juliet, you have to, an actor needs to give it her own life. Meaning the actor is important that you borrow the character. Because first of all, you're going to give your character your body and your voice. And I'm saying go further. Give the character your life, your story as well. And so that the character can give you, so like it's an exchange between the actor and the character. The character gives you his personality, and you give the character your story and your life and your body and your voice.
At the very end, one of the actors, there are the testimonies at the end, an actor says the best way to kill an African story is to tell it in English. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I understand then, what the meaning of that is, given that this is a story in English that does involve an African story.
It's about translation. There are a lot of things, when translated, the meaning jumps out of the window. There are some of the things in African languages, when you translate them, it's actually not quite what it's meant. And if the victor is always the one who's left to tell the story of the victim, I am wondering if the victim really knows how does the victim make sense of the story that is being told on his or her behalf.
Then what's the importance of telling Dark Noon in English?
The importance of telling Dark Noon in English is to give a frame and to keep the audience. And secondly, but the performative elements of it, they are not even using the language is not a big part of Dark Noon. A big part of Dark Noon is the performance through somatic memory. The performance of Dark Noon is Lillian giving birth in the middle of the stage, just like my grandmother who gave birth to my aunt at the back of the truck as they were moving after they were kicked out of the farm as they're traveling, and naming her child Fuduga. Fuduga means to move from one place to another. So there are a lot of stories that the audience is not privileged to hear, but the actors, when Sia says Nhlanhla and walking around with the cross and sleeping in the middle of nowhere, and when we sing Amen, like the meaning is very, very different, because every single movement that happens in the piece is linked to the personal story of the actor. And for me as a choreographer, these are movements that are informed. I am very happy that it is, in a way, a cathartic process for the performers. It's an internal conversation.
I think we need to open it up to questions now and see if anyone has any questions. This lady here, I can barely see you here, but this lady.
Mhm. Is there a microphone that can be roving? Do we have a roving microphone for the audience members? Or we can use one of our microphones to do that, so that we want to answer the questions as best way as possible.
Here, why don't we use mine? So I'm just going to be pointing.
Can you please repeat your question, ma'am? Please give her a microphone.
Thank you. It just has to do with the word settler, which was used throughout in the performance, especially the Little House on the Prairie scenes, and why that word instead of other words.
Settler is the word we are familiar with in our political language in South Africa. One of the struggle songs that we sing in South Africa during apartheid, when we were fantasizing about having guns and shooting all white people who were oppressing us in South Africa. And we had no guns because obviously we were under apartheid, so there's no way you will have a gun, you can buy a gun. And so it was a fantasy because Umkhonto Wesizwe was training in Mozambique, and we thought there'll be a big war as children, at 12, and then we would sing a song that goes, one settler, one bullet, one settler, 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 bullet, 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 settler, settler. And after 1994, it was seen as a song that incites violence, it's going to take the country backwards and all that. So the word settler in the political spaces of South Africa, when we have underground meetings, it's a common word, settler.
One of the things I noticed last night watching the play was I'm old enough that I've seen most Westerns, and I thought this was much more than I ever saw from American Westerns. I mean, I could see the influence of what you've seen in your life in this. I don't think Westerns that we watched were as violent. We didn't really see what happened to the Indians. That was kept from us, I thought. You don't agree? I mean, you felt like you had really seen all this happen in Westerns that we saw as children on the TV, or I don't. I think I could see right off the bat is what you'd been through.
I'm so sorry that I'm struggling to hear because of the echo, or maybe it's the position that I am. Did you hear? You can use this.
Okay, I'll pass it back to you. She was saying that in the Westerns that she watched growing up, she didn't see that kind of violence, that she was seeing your life in that. And to a certain degree, you're turning the mythology inside out, though, aren't you? I mean, she was saying that she was seeing much more than what she saw growing up watching Western movies.
It's a big thing. Hence, I'm saying we're not repeating what's in the movie. We definitely are not repeating what's in the movie. We are breathing what lives in us. We are breathing what I've experienced as a 12 and a 14-year-old, where people will be burned alive, and I'll watch them, and that's the story we're telling. Yes, it did. Dark Noon changed nothing from the original version. The only thing we've done, at Edinburgh, we had to make it shorter because the audience need to hop from one venue to another, and it's really few sections, and which will be reinstated. Sorry, I can hear you.
I just wanted to thank you so much for when you were singing the crying songs, because I thought of, as an American, of the songs that I've heard of Indians. Always were treated like a battle song. And what I heard was crying. I heard them crying of the land that the land that was taken over. And I had not heard that in those songs ever. I'd always heard, a warrior song. Maybe why the Westerns were there is this warrior song. And what I heard was a crying song. And I wanted to thank you for that. I just hadn't heard it. And as soon as you did it, I immediately said that to me it wasn't South Africa, it was American.
Thank you. And that song I sang, it is the song today. It will be sang by warriors carrying shields and throwing the spears in the, and wielding their spears. It's a very powerful song. But in terms of the context, it's repeating how the mother of the king cried when the king dies.
How was the title Dark Noon chosen?
The title Dark Noon. My collaborator, my co-director, Tu Bien, came with the title. And I can give you the meaning in terms of a South African context. In South African context, there is an expression that says, La shonela ngemini. Awu laze langishonela ngemini. It means when the sun sets during the day, or when the sun sets at noon. It means when the worst of the worst thing imaginable is happening. Sun will never set during the day. And when you lose your parents, we would say, oh, the sun has set at the Sibanyoni's family. We are here to see you because we've heard that the sun has set on you, and we want to tell you that we are with you So it's an expression of when the worst of the worst has happened. I don't know what Tu was thinking when he said that, but in South Africa, that's what it means.
There was no sense of playing off the title of the American Western movie High Noon.
Now you've reminded me. In fact, now you've reminded me, because if Tu was here, he would have answered this question even better. I know that it was taken from a title of another Western, but I didn't remember what it was. But in the South African context, that's what it means.
That seems more significant. Question from me. The South African elections have just taken place. The ANC, after 30 years with absolute power, is now going to have to share power with another party. What do you think is going to happen there, and especially with the kind of rebirth of the Jacob Zuma, and when you were talking about Mkhonto Wesizwe, the name of his new party is MK, referring to that, and I'm just wondering if you have any sense of what's going to happen now in South Africa.
The glorious, mighty ANC that the world loves, the ANC of Oliver Tambo, the ANC of Nelson Mandela, the ANC that liberated us. We were too young and too drunk on democracy to understand there's a lot of things. And today there's a different view of looking at our beloved ANC and our beloved Nelson Mandela, due to the negotiation that happened in 1994 which protects the Land Act of 1913, which protects the ownership of the mines by the foreign companies even today, which protects the white monopoly capital, which protects the modern day slavery. And therefore, South Africa, we are stuck with a bodyguard of the apartheid regime through the ANC. The ANC will build the houses. The white people will not look for dumpers in the streets. Yes, we will go to the schools with white children now, and we will go to the beaches with white people now, but all the key economic sectors will remain with the people who've had them since 300 years ago. All the mines are still called Anglo-American mine, that who owns the gold is Americans and the English of all the mines in South Africa. All the banking system still belongs to the land of South Africa. The land ownership in South Africa, only 8% of South African land is owned by black people. So it's a complicated question.
Do you anticipate a lot of political strife going forward with the ANC having to share power? Who do you think will rise up in terms of being the other partner or other partners in the government?
The land was taken through the apartheid system and colonial system is built through the laws and parliament laws. The apartheid laws were made in the parliament. And whoever is in the parliament needs to protect the previous laws. So it is not the parliament system that will bring democracy and that will bring change to South Africa. Because when you are in parliament, you need to conform to how parliament operates. So it needs something else.
The parallels that you speak of in South Africa are astounding when compared to the system we have here in the United States with a two-party system, the Democrats and the Republicans. Nobody serves the people. Nobody serves the workers. Nobody serves poor people. It's all about power. You can't rock the boat. There's no courage among our leaders anymore. No courage. Because to be courageous, you would jeopardize your power.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions? Okay, then. Do you have anything else you want to tell us?
Thank you so much for having us, and we hope you continue telling your friends and your families and your neighbors and the neighbors of your neighbors and the friends of your friends to really come and experience what you have experienced in Dagenham. It is really a life-changing experience for us on stage, and we love performing for you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you.